Welcome to the Wizards of Ecom, your no-fluff playbook for online success. Each episode is fully packed with actionable tactics you can implement in your business right now. Take your life to a higher level and excel in your online success. It's time to work on you and your business. Let's do this. Welcome back to the Wizards of Ecom podcast. This is episode number 126. My name is Carlos Alvarez, and I'll be your host for the show. On today's episode, we have two exciting guests, Chris Shipferling and Joe Hogg, managing partners of Global Wired Advisors. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hey, thanks, Carlos.
Here, Carlos.
Stoked we're doing this. I've invited both of you on the show to clear up a topic that I didn't even know I was unclear on, honestly, until ASGTG in New York, I think last month. And I was listening to Tim Jordan's presentation, and he prefaced it in like typical Tim Jordan fashion, which is, this is going to be very controversial, but so that got me listening a little bit, but it was still, I was mainly there to support Tim. I wasn't really like listening. I think halfway through what he was talking about though, which is like the differences between what is a broker, an aggregator, broker plus, which he says is a coin he possibly termed, and investment banking. That really got my attention halfway through, and I missed a bunch of it. So I think if I don't know the differences between most of them, I don't think the majority of the listeners of the show know it, and the members of my group know it. I just honestly thought it was just synonymous. I was like, some people like to call it one thing and not the other. I just genuinely didn't know the difference. So goal of the show is to go over what are the differences between those different models, I'm going to call them, and not just the differences, but maybe I have to assume here that every model fits for certain types of sellers at certain times. It doesn't mean one is evil, or maybe I'm wrong. I don't know, but I can't think of, two better people to discuss the topic.
Thanks.
So that's why we're here. You guys are from Global Wired Advisors, and of the models above, you're in investment banking. I'm saying that correct? Yes.
Correct. Yes.
Correct.
Right. And since neither of you have been on the show before, and we're going to be throwing around a lot of terms that now I don't even really get surrounding like mergers and acquisition jargon. Without getting into the differences of the models yet, I just mentioned, who is Global Wired Advisors, and how did you guys get into investment banking pre this Amazon hype of buying businesses?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I can take that one. So, Global Wired Advisors, we are a lower middle market investment bank, and we are focused on digital consumer products. And really it's consumer products in general, whether that means you're an Amazon based business, primarily most of your revenue concentration is through Amazon. It might be a mixture of Amazon and direct to consumer. It might be full direct to consumer, or you might have an omni-channel business where you've got, touching lots of different sales channels. Our focus is primarily in consumer products. With all of this liquidity chasing Amazon FBA assets over the past couple of years, we actually got into this. I'll back it up a little bit. So just to give you just quickly our backgrounds, I came from consumer products. So I worked there for, in various different companies as a sales and marketing executive, primarily in baby and toy. And so I worked for, some of the small businesses and some larger businesses, like Evenflow is more kind of a household name. And so I actually met up with Joe, our other two partners, Chris and Jason, who came from decades of investment banking experience. And so they worked for the household banks, we call them the bulge bracket institutional investment banks. So, Wells Fargo, Joe worked there for well over 14 years running their broker dealer. I know I'm using jargon, man. So, anyways, but worked for Citi, and then Chris, our other partner, worked for the Hartford on the buy side, various private equity and credit hedge funds. Jason, his last stint was with Bayview Asset Management as a managing director. Actually, it was in Doral, I think is where it was, right, Joe? Doral, Florida?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
That's my office. My office.
Well, what's that nice mall that's there? It's got the Maserati Ferrari dealership. I think I know that's a Maserati, and I think a Porsche dealership. It's an outdoor mall, which I just described every mall in Florida. But
yeah, that's Doral City Place. That's where my office is at. So
is it really? Okay. Well, Bayview actually has their offices there as well. So it's a big asset management company. He worked. I think at the time he said he was managing, I think close to $9 billion, something like that. And so big financial engineering backgrounds mixed with strong consumer product. I actually I pivoted my career back in 2015. I was working for a Spanish brand called Jeanne, and I had $500,000 of inventory sitting in a warehouse. And my specialty stores didn't want it. I was between collections, so I had to go and figure out Amazon. So I learned from Manny Coates and Kevin King, listening to their podcast vicariously, getting education, because there's no executive course at Cornell on how to manage your Seller Central account, right? And so kind of learned through the School of Hard Knocks on how to take a widget, run it through Amazon Seller Central and sell it. And then I also studied digital marketing. How do I get the first handshake with mom and dad through other means, SEO, SEM, email marketing, et cetera. So I started my own consulting career. That's where I helped. I call them antiquated enterprises formulate good digital strategy. When we met up, we realized very quickly, Joe, Jason, and Chris already had an effort called Providium Advisors, which was a middle market investment bank that was helping small to medium-sized businesses more in the traditional sectors. And when we got together, we met and said, hey, you know what? There's a huge opportunity. And this is pre-aggregator, man. This is pre all this liquidity flowing in the space. We saw it. We saw that e-commerce was growing 1%, retail penetration sales per year. But we were looking at the charts going, the dam's about to break at some point. And so we started Global Wired Advisors really with our whole thesis was this space deserves a better process when it comes time to sell their company. That was our whole thesis at the time. You had business brokers, which we'll get into in a moment, primarily selling Amazon-based businesses or e-commerce-based businesses. And we said, hey, we can deploy the decades of investment banking and Fortune 100 mergers and acquisitions experience and that process. We can deploy that with these companies. And at the end of the transaction, when it closes to whoever the acquirer may be, it's going to be a much better optimized trade than if they went through traditional means of a business broker. So that's why we started.
Was there, you mentioned you saw that you could help sellers sell their businesses easier. Was there any specific things that you saw that were just like glaringly bad? And you're like, wow, this is upside down. This is not good for anybody that's participating in this. And we can solve for this. Was there one or two that you can recall?
I'll let Joe take this.
Yeah, there were many. There were many, actually. When we were putting together the Global Wired platform, coming from, investment banking, traditional capital markets, we're very accustomed to going through, a very thorough sell side process where you get to know a company extremely well. You get to know, effectively, obviously what its strengths and weaknesses are, but you also model out what an optimized version of it would be so that you have a good understanding of what the company can do going forward, how it performs under different pressure tests, and how it fits into a given industry vertical. And this approach that has been, used by, investment banking teams around the world for years is the right approach to bringing an asset or a company to market or going into any other transaction, whether it's an equity raise or a debt placement, because if you don't go through this thorough of a process, then you're not really showcasing the opportunity, the company, in the right light. You're not really able to answer questions about, how the company could perform in different operating environments, how it likely will perform, what are the opportunities to focus on to scale the company. And, when we looked at the processes that were being applied by brokers plus, I guess, kind of using some of the terminology we're going to go through later in this podcast, we found that, really none of that was being done. It was really, I guess, a ham-handed listing approach where opportunities were, effectively just listed, email blasted, not a lot of thought, not much critical thought was going into the company itself or how the company could be scaled or how it could fit in different industries or with other companies, et cetera. So we felt that was really not a good thing. We felt that, that was something that, had to be improved. So we really just borrowed the processes that we've been following, all of our lives in investment banking, that we applied in Profitably Advisors to the Global Wired Advisors platform. And we began taking clients through this process. And we found that we were achieving higher multiples. We found that, the buy side was extremely excited about deals we were bringing because of the thoroughness of the analysis that we were putting in prior to bringing an opportunity out. And it really shortened due diligence. And, truthfully, when we're going through this process, we're uncovering things that could be surprises in due diligence that could derail, deal closings. Learning that up front, through, again, a thorough approach, avoided a lot of pitfalls, avoided a lot of problems. So that was really, I would say, the genesis of the Global Wired effort. And it's met with, tremendous success. And just, there's so many people that, that are telling us that they, are glad that, we're bringing this approach to the space.
Thank you for sharing that. Let me see if I can, see if I understood this right in what you said, is that I'm thinking now as a seller and trying to imagine, like, I was on the seller end of one of those transactions that you were navigating for me, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So you guys could almost look at my business and say, okay, yeah, you have this offer, but if you do this, this, and this in 8 months or 6 months, you're going to get a lot more because we think this can happen. Am I summing that up correctly?
Kind of, in getting an offer, it's really before an offer. So, when someone is contemplating taking their company to market for, let's say, a full sale, when they engage us, we're going to do a deep dive on their organization, what they're doing, their products, their markets, the industry that they're in. And we're going to develop an optimized view of what that company can do going forward. And it's critical to build that. It's critical to know that when you go to market before you are fielding offers. It's critical to have that expression of the opportunity to the market so that it's very clear what the potential of the company is. And if you don't do that, then you're really relying on the buy side to figure a lot of that out. And they're pretty sharp. Now they can get to the punchline pretty quick, but they're obviously, as buyers, looking for an advantage with respect to enterprise value. And if they see an opportunity that perhaps you didn't see because you weren't really looking at the whole picture, they're certainly not going to tell you. They're certainly not going to say, hey, wow, you missed this opportunity. We're going to give you another half turn of multiple because of that opportunity you failed to disclose, right? So it's important to do that analysis up front so that you are achieving maximum value in a transaction.
Well, and I could jump in real quick, to clarify maybe a little bit on what you were asking, Carlos. We do a lot of vetting prior to engaging a client. So there's a lot of conversations that occur. There's a lot of, we go under NDA, we look at your business, and we will give you that analysis. Like, we will tell you, look, going to market today looks like this, but here are a couple things that are kind of glaring to your point that the buy side is going to be a little queasy on. So and we look at things from a buy side perspective, the whole time we're either pre-engagement with you as a seller, and then obviously in that due diligence period before we take you out to market, we're looking at everything from a lens of a buyer, the most sophisticated buyer you can think of. We ask a ton of questions and we deep dive, but prior to engagement, we're going to really dive deep. And if there are a couple things that need to be worked on, we're going to tell you, work on them, and this is how your valuation will change. And also, in some cases, this is the type of buyer that now becomes, call it, unlocked in the process, right? So, you might have a business that's only stamping, say, $1 million of cash flow or $1.5 million of cash flow, and we tell you a few things to work on to get it up to, say, 3 million. Plus you're really working on, say, a branding exercise, that at that point we might be able to tell you, hey, look, we believe private equity, corporate strategics now would be very interested in this business. So, we're really, really good at that kind of deep critical thinking and analysis.
Awesome. Joe, you mentioned that you also save a lot of time, it sounds like, on the buyer side in their due diligence process. Did I say that right?
You did.
So it seems like it's not a you are our enemy type of thing. Like you work with both sides. Does that help a great deal in building your network of, I want to say almost like matchmaking, like, this particular buyer really excels in X niche. So when you now encounter a seller that wants to sell, you can almost match better at times.
Absolutely. You need to know the market, to your point. You need to know, what we refer to them as axes, what different buy side axes are, who's looking for what particular, type of asset size that and whatnot, who maybe is scaling back, who's kind of going for it. That's all very important. But, answering your question, yes, having everything that is required in due diligence in one place going into a transaction is important. And, we use a deal room, we use an electronic deal room where, we will have two sections of a deal room for an individual deal. And, one section obviously has, our offering memorandum, which is, typically 50, 60, 70 pages long. Looks like a corporate annual report. It is very in-depth, goes into just a lot of details about the company, the things that we've learned in working with the client prior to taking the company to market. But also in the other section of the deal room is, all the material that we used to build that presentation, as well as additional information and data that we know the buy side is going to ask for. We present a client with a due diligence request list up front that basically drives the population of that section of the deal room, so that, when we get to due diligence, the information is all there. When, we're kicking the process off, there isn't a scramble to find things that people are looking for that, we know people are going to want. So, the time kills deals, no question. It's a very old saying. And anything that you can do to optimize the process so that, you have all the information that you need, everything is prepared well, everything is put together in one spot is hugely beneficial.
Yeah.
Love it. That actually, go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say too, I mean, just to even bring it down to, real life examples. When we were at ASGTG, we had, who was there. I mean, it wasn't private equity. It wasn't, it was aggregators that are looking for Amazon assets. And exactly the aggregators that were there. We had several of them come to us making introductions to their team. Hey, this is Global Wired Advisors. It was always followed up with, we love their deals because we can trust what comes to our desk. And you've got to understand, with a lot of the brokers out there, they're putting together bad financials, bad materials. And what they don't hear, and we hear, is that the buy side is saying, I don't trust it. And I've got to effectively just, I got to do a ton of analysis and a ton of work now just to actually get to what the heck am I buying. But most times what that leads to is lower multiples, discounted structures, because they don't trust what they're receiving.
This really brings home for me since Tim's speech was the inspiration for this episode. Another quote by Tim. This time later in the night, we were at Ecom Cooperative. We're at Ecom Cooperative.
Yeah,
love Tim. If you don't know Tim, like, this is not a shock to you, but like Tim, he gets up there, he's giving a speech. I don't think he knew he was getting up there to talk, but he was ready. And one of the things he said was basically, love Chris, Global Wired Advisors, and basically Global Wired Advisors are who makes Thrasio pay you more to sellers, right? Am I saying that right? Now, nothing against Thrasio.
Yeah.
Nothing at all against Thrasio, but that was just like the example name that he gave. So what you guys just described to me now makes sense.
Yes, that's right.
So awesome. Let's get into this breakdown of the different types. So in this hierarchy, if you will, of M&A models, that we mentioned earlier, I personally consider Global Wired Advisors to be, the creme de la creme. But let's begin on the other side of things, and I guess work our way up.
Yeah.
So as plain English as possible, you guys are doing great so far. I don't feel overwhelmed by the terminology or anything like that. You guys are killing it. Instead of breaking this into several questions, I feel like you guys could we could just riff if we hear like what we're trying to cover. So what I'm trying to get at is, what is a broker? What is an aggregator? What is Broker Plus? And finally, where does Global Wired Advisors play into all of that? And who should be looking for what?
Yeah, and I can take kind of Broker Plus pretty quick. And then I think where there seems to be a lot of confusion is around investment bank and aggregator, right? I get a lot of feedback of, oh, so you buy businesses. No, we don't buy businesses. And here's what an investment bank really does. So I want to spend, if that's okay, probably a little bit more on the difference between like, what's the aggregator, what's the investment bank. A traditional business broker has been around for a long, long time, right? They got your Sunbelts and the Transworlds of the world. Typically what they do is they've got, usually zero M&A experience, zero financial or finance experience. You could be, a used car salesman one day, and you can be a business broker the next, right? So a lot of the brokers in this space, the reason why they're brokers is because they had that particular firm sell their business, and then they started working as a business broker, right? So the barrier to entry, to be very blunt, it's quite low. It's because of the type of process that they run. So a broker is very passive. It's more of a listing agent. The materials aren't very thorough. They're not really explaining the business. They might do a short interview and maybe a video from the seller, but let's be blunt, it's still highly anemic. It doesn't actually capture the spirit of what this business really is. And as Joe said, kind of the fully optimized version of what that company is. And they typically will blast it out through an email list. And then now the biggest blessing to a broker has been the aggregators, because it's now made their life a lot easier to kind of send information to them. But the feedback from the aggregator side has been, I don't really trust their materials, right? I don't really trust what I'm receiving. So I kind of would prefer to get them out of the way. So when you hear aggregators talk about business brokers, it's for a specific reason. It's because they're M&A teams who come from, Goldman Sachs potentially, or other large investment banks, other large private equity. They're used to seeing materials in a very specific way, the materials that we produce. And
these are greater barrier of entry. Sorry to cut you off. So like this aggregator, you'd call it a greater barrier of entry than broker.
Well, they're on the buy side, right? And so they're buy side M&A teams, of course, they're pulling people from very large roles, and from other kind of larger investment banks. So with them working with the broker, it's just a bit disjointed. So that's a broker. Broker Plus really, are folks that may even use terminology like we're an M&A advisor or we're an investment bank, but they're actually not. And Joe will get into why that's a contrast. If you say you're an investment bank, there's very specific reasons why you say that, which Joe will walk us through. But a Broker Plus just does a little bit better job than the broker. They might put some materials together that look a little nicer, but they're actually not doing any detail or thoroughness when it comes to, say, the projections of the business, the opportunity of the company. They're not actually articulating. They pretty much only take you on one process, and that's, to be blunt, it's really the aggregator space or biz buy sell. And again, our process, which Joe will talk about here in a moment, is drastically different. So when you're looking at a Broker Plus, it's still same kind of bucket. Sometimes they try and use different terminology to make themselves sound better, but the reality is pretty much the same thing.
Who should work? Let me see. Who should work with a broker or Broker Plus? Like, what type of person in their business is a good fit for Broker Plus?
Anybody who's got more of a kind of a simple, not a very complex company and typically that's materialized in sales revenue, right? I mean, this is just, it is what it is. The higher revenue you have, the more complex your company is, period, right? And so for us, in our criteria, our engagement criteria is working with businesses that are materializing 1.5 to 10 million of EBITDA. So let me now use more kind of layman's terms. 5 to 6 million of revenue plus is typically where we're engaging with clients. And I'd say anyone that's really less than that, and definitely less than $1 million of revenue, I think engaging with a broker to help you at least kind of get in front of people, as long as you've got a simple business, kind of simple SKU set, simple financials, it can absolutely enhance the process of making sure that you get a good transaction at that size. What becomes really disjointed is like, when a broker is trying to take this very complex company to market and they have no means to take it past really aggregators, and aggregators don't even really trust them. So, to go to a private equity fund or what we call financial sponsors, but private equity, or maybe a family office, maybe a corporate strategic, this is where it breaks down very quickly. The broker process cannot do it, period.
I learned something new there. So,
Okay.
so what do we tackle next? We're going to go.
Let's go aggregator, and then we can go investment bank. I think that's pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. And, just to kind of, resync the nomenclature that we're using, broker plus and investment bank are going to be sell side approaches, meaning that they're going to work with companies to sell their assets. In the case of investment banks do more, raise money, place debt, et cetera. Whereas aggregator is on the buy side. They're going to be buying companies. They're going to be focused on acquiring assets. So that's the primary difference between the four. Diving into aggregators, or roll-up companies, I guess, as they're commonly referred to, are a class of investment fund that focuses on the acquisition of brands, typically early stage, in a given channel, for instance, Amazon. And oftentimes explaining, exactly what an aggregator is, it's useful to compare and contrast it to traditional private equity, which is also a buy-side effort. And most people have heard of private equity. They understand that private equity buys companies. They have a certain approach. So I think comparing and contrasting the two is useful. Starting with traditional private equity. Traditional private equity will typically focus on 1, 2, or 3 specific industry verticals, we refer to them as, where they have platform investments, large investments. They have operating partners with deep expertise in those industry verticals. They have a number of relationships and contacts in those particular industries, and they have competitive advantages with that approach. So when they are looking at doing acquisitions, it is usually focused in that, specialty zip code, if you will. So, that model, again, has been around for a long time. It is the way, a lot of private equity money is deployed, and it's a bit different than the aggregator model. So the aggregator model, on the other hand, is industry agnostic for the most part. They, will do pet products as easily as they do hair care products or supplements. So their focus, their competitive advantage, is not on necessarily expertise in a given industry, but rather on optimizing efficiencies across the platform they're playing. Again, in this case, Amazon. So go ahead. You had a question.
And it's just to put a name to it. Again, I'm going to go with here as an aggregator, we're talking about like a Goja or a Thrasio or something like
Correct.
that. Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
And they optimize by across a platform, like you're saying on Amazon, like the logistics side, the ads, and they just optimize across it regardless of the niche.
Correct. That's correct. Regardless of the industry. So you can think of traditional private equity as having kind of a vertical orientation where, they are looking to develop competitive advantages deep into a particular industry sector or niche, whereas an aggregator will be more horizontally focused, working across multiple industries and optimizing efficiencies across those industries at the platform level. So that's a good way to understand aggregators in general by, again, comparing and contrasting them to traditional private equity. There's also another difference. So traditional private equity is typically equity funded, meaning that the capital that they're deploying is coming from investors who are committing that capital looking for a return. Whereas in the aggregator space, there's a lot more debt. The aggregator space, particularly recently, is deploying not only invested capital, but also debt that they're drawing into the equation to acquire companies. So the risk return profiles for, an average or median company operating in each space is going to be different. It's going to be different. And the returns, as you can imagine, when leverage or debt is deployed in one space, the highs are going to be high and the lows are going to be low, meaning when things are going good, when margins are wide, top lines are growing, you're going to see really outsized returns for equity that is deployed. And again, I'm talking about aggregators. However, when growth slows and margins compress and you've deployed more debt than typically in a traditional private equity structure, then you start running into a little bit of trouble. You start running into performance issues. So, it's important to keep in mind the difference between the two. And I think because the space is so young, the aggregator space is so young, the world is somewhat flat. People have, approached the space like it is traditional private equity under the assumption that, it is primarily equity capital funded and that, it is, patient capital with a long-term view and short-term wiggles or bumps are not going to have outsized impacts. And that's for some aggregators, that's the case, but for most, it's probably not. So I hope that kind of answers the question and provides some light on
100%. Like I feel crystal clear on this. It's nuts. Like this is the one thing that I feel like was my biggest takeaway from ASGTG. And anytime I get to the main reason for starting a podcast to begin with was to bring on amazing people and learn something yourself on the show. So anytime that can happen, that's awesome. And I definitely learned a lot here. What I keep hearing, and this is getting into like the general landscape of how things are really quick. I've sold a bunch of Amazon businesses over the last 15 years, but this was really pre this, brokers and aggregators being something that people are regularly talking about as Amazon sellers. So I haven't sold in about 3 years, but is it sustainable? Like what's going on? Like I hear people talking about 6X and I heard somebody say 8X. I never saw anything like that. Like we had 3 and I thought that's what you do. Like this was an amazing thing. I can't imagine any business I sold getting 6 or 8. And I'm seeing some of the ones that are getting 6 or 8. So it just doesn't seem sustainable for me. Am I missing something here?
Well, the market is very young still, and it is going through, the typical phases of growth that any market would go to. Eventually, there is going to be a maturity phase. Then, of course, there's going to be a weaning out phase. And, then we're going to go forward from there. I think that, the multiple expansion that we've seen recently is really a consequence mostly of just supply and demand. There's been so much debt and equity raised, over the course of the last year and a half, by aggregators relative to assets that can be acquired that are good assets that fit their investment mandates. And there's a scramble to acquire these particular assets. There are plenty of sellers on Amazon, but keep in mind that when you have a fund of any kind, you're going to have an investment mandate. You're going to have particular debt covenants that require you to acquire assets with sometimes restrictive multiples. You're going to have equity investors that are going to have certain risk preferences. And it isn't a free for all. In other words, it's not, oh wow, we've raised all this money, let's buy whatever we want. It is going to be more of a focused effort that, and a lot of these guys are focusing on high quality assets, as they should, and there really just aren't enough relative to the amount of money that's been raised in such a short period of time right now. So it's leading to multiple expansion, and I think that at some point, we're probably going to see, because there hasn't been a lot of scrutiny yet on aggregator returns on invested capital relative to the weighted average cost of capital, or basically their P&L. We're going to see more of that. I think that as we have roughly 70 plus aggregators in the space now that are active, but as that number grows, and it will, and as we get a year or so further down the road, I think that aggregator returns are going to be scrutinized for sure, and I think that they're going to be compared. And I think that the space, much as traditional private equity had to do, is going to be much more sensitive to volatility of returns, and much more sensitive on, again, maximizing the spread between return on invested capital and the weighted average cost of capital. Keep in mind that for a lot of aggregators, that are getting started, they're usually mostly debt funded, if not all debt funded, and that debt is pretty expensive. It's venture capital debt, and it can have a price tag of 16, 17, 18%, which is pretty punitive. If you're acquiring an asset that's not growing really fast, it's pretty punitive, right? So a bump in the road can be really, really damaging. So I think that, at some point we're going to see probably a bit more scrutiny on comparative returns. And I think as more money comes into the space, I think that, you're going to see a little bit more of a traditional private equity approach. And I think that is going to lead to, trees don't grow to the sky. It's probably going to lead to a capping out of multiples, right? But make no mistake, this is something that, is in early innings. I mean, I think that, the acquisition of Amazon brands is really by professional money, institutional money, is really just getting started. I mean, just like any other financial innovation, it is going to have zigs and zags, but there are a lot of innings to play here.
Yeah.
You guys crushed it. I learned a ton. I want to be respectful of your time and start bringing this to a close. I have a laundry list of questions, but I'll catch you offline or at the next event. By the way, huge thank you again for how generous you guys were when you came down here to South Florida.
Yeah, we'll be back.
Mingling with everybody, treating everybody to some awesome burgers and beers. It was a great time. People are still talking about missing it, or how great of a time they had at the event. You guys are definitely the good guys. What's the best? Let me say this a different way. I feel like this gets asked too much. Like, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you? But who are the types of sellers you want reaching out to you guys? Yeah. And what's the best way to go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, our engagement criteria is 1.5 million to 10 million of EBITDA, right? And so, and we're looking to take on, brands. We're looking to take on brands to market, right? And folks that have, if it's an all Amazon business, it's a seller central that's filled with a good brand, not 20 different categories sitting inside of the seller central. So as far as our engagement criteria, we're fairly strict in terms of who we take to market. But with your group, I mean, as you know, I've been very, very, very altruistic, and I want to continue to stay that way with you guys. So, I mean, go to our website. We have a valuation tool. You don't find a valuation tool on Bank of America or on Goldman Sachs. The reason why we do it is because sellers in the lower middle market, founders and owners, they love to plug in their numbers and they love to play, what am I worth, right? And so we wanted to provide a good tool. We put a lot of data into it, just something that kind of gives 90,000 feet guidance. So if you go to our website, fill out the valuation tool. It's a good tool. It goes directly to us. We will be in touch with you. Fill out a consultation form. My email address and my phone number are both on the website. So, if someone wants to reach out and says, I'm part of the Wizards of Ecom, I heard you talking to Carlos, I've got a couple questions, Carlos, I promised you, a while ago, we want to be your resource. We're not just looking for, come in and just dip in and just say, hey, which by the way, is also another business development tactic. A lot of different aggregators out there. Give me your leads. I give you nothing back. This is a back and forth. This is a long-term relationship. So that's our engagement criteria, but we're here to really answer questions. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of confusion out there. We want to dispel all of it.
I love it, guys. Final question. I'll let you off the hook and we go back to our working days. Question I ask all the guests that are on this show, and that is, what is your favorite book and why?
Joe, you want to hit that first?
Sure. I have two, actually. I like, Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations and Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. I think that, they are bookends on, free market thinking, with respect to how economies should function and how people should think. So I'm huge fans of both.
I'm gonna go with Good to Great, Jim Collins. It was the first, call it, I'd say, big boy business book that I read, and it really helped formulate the way that I think about just structure, people, leadership, and really how he breaks down the different levels of leadership. And level 5 leadership has just stuck in my head pretty much since about 2002.
Absolutely. I've not read Good to Great, so I'm going to order that. Wealth of Nations, I loved it. Atlas Shrugged's actually my favorite book ever. So
okay, good. That's good. Yeah.
I love Fountainhead too. It's close between Atlas
is.
Shrugged and Fountainhead, but Atlas Shrugged definitely gets it. You guys killed it.
Thanks.
I can't wait to release this episode. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Carlos.
And we'll talk to everybody next time.
Good deal. Thanks.
It was fun sharing this episode with you. If you found value in what you've heard, please show your love with a subscribe, rate, and review of the show. Until next time.